Hey, how you doing?
All right. Anyway, so
Okay.
we've got a division. So we're going to clearly divide this. I know it's going to be a two-part episode, but we're gonna take about 30 minutes, and we're gonna leave it to 30 minutes to do the first half of the chat, and then the other 30 minutes will be the second part. So
we'll do the first set of questions, kind of start there on side one, and side B.
Flip side.
The flip side, we'll do the collaboration questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a vinyl record. I'm down with that.
A vinyl. You're gonna etch out the
side B.
You're gonna etch out on the vinyl. Okay.
I wish we had some vinyl.
On the B side.
All right. So who's got the record button then? Oh, Sam's recording already. Okay.
Are we really recording?
Is it really recording, Sam?
It says he is.
Recording.
I see it up at the corner. So Sam is recording.
Is recording. Okay, excellent.
Okay. Everyone has confirmation on that. So
Yeah, I see it, but
yeah.
And as via our last recording, everyone has access to it as well.
Even better. Okay.
I just think Sam wants to continue these chats so we can sabotaging the. We can keep doing them. You don't have to do all that.
Right?
We'll just keep rebooting all of our old podcasts and just leave it at that.
We'll just keep having visits. So whoever said the co-conspirators last time, that has to get in again.
Well, that was all of them. They all mentioned
so
that.
Good.
So
there were a couple of really golden lines last time.
It was Dodson though. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and start this off officially, and then we can go from there. So, hey, everybody. This is Matt and Laura, and we are having a two-part podcast of the Creativity Department. And we have with us a slew of... a plethora. And so we have with us the Journal Fodder Junkies, and there are 5 of them. And I'm counting that right?
I don't know.
Okay, but that group started out very small, and so we just want to
continues to grow
and continues to grow as it passes out its amazingness of journals.
So we have 5 amazing artists and educators with us, and we would love it if everybody could just go round robin and introduce themselves and tell the audience who they are and what they do and what their passion is.
Go.
Sam, you go first.
I'll go first. All right.
Okay.
So my name is Sam Peck, a.k.a. Samuel Peck, a.k.a. Speck. What do? I am a researcher currently, educator, artist, teacher at the University of Minnesota. Working on my PhD, and I am super passionate about visual journals. I'm doing a PhD about the project that all of us are involved in, Tetra Draw and Play Here, which is another aspect, or I'd say an offshoot from the genealogy of the Journal Fodder Junkies.
Nice. Yep. Dave?
Me. Okay.
Yes.
My name is David Modler. One half of the dynamic duo, the original dynamic duo of the Journal Fodder Junkies. I'm also a co-founder of the Tetra Draw and Play Here project with Sam Peck. Currently, I live in Rockville, Maryland. I am an associate professor at Shepherd University, which is just over the border in West Virginia, where I coordinate the art education program and the foundations program. And I'm currently on sabbatical, but all my plans were canceled. So I'm just drawing and playing and here to talk about visual journals.
Nice.
That sounds nice. Michael. Either Michael.
Which Michael?
Michael Bell.
Let's go with Bell.
All right. I'm Michael Bell. I'm an artist, TED speaker, author, visual journaling pioneer, founder of 31 Nights, and I'm currently supervisor of visual and performing arts at Queen Anne's County Public Schools. And I'm here to share my wealth of knowledge about visual journaling and the power of the prompt.
Awesome.
Dodson?
All right, I'm Michael Dodson. I teach at French Prairie Middle School, which is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in Woodburn, Oregon, which is a little south of Oregon. This is my 25th year of teaching, so kind of winding down this 25th year in a very unique way. I kind of got on this crazy bandwagon. I first met Sam and Dave at a workshop for NAEA in New Orleans, and then I met Eric soon after. And I've been drinking the Visual Journal's Kool-Aid ever since. I love the challenges and the inspiration that come from turning like new eyes and reluctant eyes in the form of middle school kids onto something like this. And it's sort of what fills my spirit now as a teacher.
All right, and guess I'll go last. My name is Eric Scott. I'm one half of the original Journal Fodder Junkies. Dave introduced me to journals about 20 years ago now, and I've been kind of doing it ever since. I was a public school art teacher. I did that for 20 years, taught both high school and elementary level. Never wanted to teach the middle school level, so I'm always in awe of the middle school art teachers. And I left public school teaching about 4 years ago to kind of do my own thing. And now I manage the Round Hill Art Center, and I get to travel and teach a lot. And of course, with this pandemic, a lot of that has been canceled. So I'm really excited to be able to connect with people online. And so anyway, that's a little bit about me.
All of you are just really interesting. Just the way you all come together, and some of you have taught together, and you've all done presentations together. I had the pleasure of being in a presentation at NAEA somewhere with David and Michael Bell, and you guys just offer so much to the community. But why is journaling the passion? Why is that the core? Why is that the thing that brings you together?
Who wants to take this? Are we going to go in the same order that we just went? Or answers?
Whatever you like.
However you want to.
All right, boom. So I'm going to drop in on this one. I would like to think that we form like Voltron. I think Wu-Tang says it the best. We are arm, leg, arm, head. We assemble like so. And we can, the power of our collaborative efforts together are more powerful than any one of us singularly. As the Voltron cats would, I think, reciprocate. And I think, any team works that way, and our multitudes just, we expand exponentially out into the world. We're always looking to take on and work on something a little bit bigger, take on a little nugget, play in a different realm, see how things can go in a different way. I think that's why, for us, the visual journal becomes the multitude that happens within explodes, just as in the same way that we like to work kind of in our own spaces and then share with each other also about like how the visual journals become shared. And then we, of course, share on to others. And then that expands in much the same way. So it's like artistic practice, education, research, I think.
It's kind of all together.
Spreads out like a big rhizomatic plant, like roots pushing out into the soil of art education.
Well, that makes me think of Eric's statement. So maybe Eric wants to take this next. But Eric, you called the Visual Journal an everything book. Is there what's that about?
Yeah, it's a term that I've been using for quite a long time, and it's just this notion that everything goes in, and it's not just a place where I make art. It's a place where I can think, I can document daily life. If I'm going through something I need to reflect, it's a place I can write and make art that kind of helps get me through things. So it's just everything goes in there, and it's not like some exalted place where I only make art or I only write kind of diary entries. And I think that's the power for me, is that it plays that part, and it's easy to sort of switch back and forth, and it's very versatile. And I think that's important with the journal, because then that way it can be anything for anybody. And what's really interesting is that everyone comes to a visual journal in a different way, that there's not one right way of doing it. And so I think that's why it really attracts people, is that it's kind of like you can come at it from any point of view, any kind of experience that you have. It's not something where, oh, I have to do it this one way and that's the only way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Would anyone else like to add on that?
Sure, I'll jump in. For me, it's the process that it really fuels the journey as artists. It's a place for students to get to know themselves, and artists of all levels to get to know themselves on a deeper intrinsic level. It's also an effective way to break down walls of communication between students, teachers, I mean, you name it, because when you really start diving into the self-exploration pieces within that visual journal, you really understand who somebody is. And you can look beyond an immediate situation, and it brings you back out of that world of reflex, paying closer attention to the process. So it's a very process versus product approach to art making, but for me, it also fuels the journey. So it everything begins in that visual journal, and then it transcends out into the canvas.
I think this is Michael Dodson, but for me, I was thinking back to something that Eric said once, and it was, you got to do this for you too. You got to find what's important in it for you. And I really feel like when, I don't know if it was exactly here, but it feels in my memory kind of timely, in that I was sort of in a rut with my teaching, and this really just sort of blew the doors open. This was for me. I picked this as like a lifeline for me. It's like, I got to get out there and be creative again. I felt like I was putting a lot of stuff out there, but I didn't feel like anything was filling me up. I think I was giving it out, but not getting a lot back. And all of a sudden I met these guys and turned onto this journal thing, which really just all of a sudden inspired and motivated my own personal practice, which then in turn turned right back and just made my teaching all that more. It also it gave me this sort of like a bit of a gut punch for myself, but also it was like, oh my God, I'm missing all of these opportunities with all of my kids to really to reach them in like individually, and sometimes like kind of spontaneously, and I've really like done them a disservice by not having this, and I got to go after that. And the Visual Journal really did that for me. It just changed the trajectory of my whole teaching philosophy, the way that I teach, the way I approach what I talk to my kids about, the way I see my kids. It was all Visual Journal.
I mean, I guess, Dodson, that kind of leads into a question that we asked during the chat, the first half of the chat, was how do you bridge the gap between, the apathy and lack of ideation and independence and innovation, like that whole process? How do you kind of bridge that gap between the two?
That was my question. Do you want me to?
Yeah,
we'd love to hear it. I'm not surprised it was your question.
You were kind of heading that way, so I wanted to just kind of bring that question up.
Here's the reason why, and it's because I feel like I talk to a lot of colleagues, a lot of teachers, and they want to know what is the magic, like how do you get this to work in your classes, and then I try to think about it, and I'm like, I try to think about the perfect environment in which a visual journal would thrive. And that's like, you've got all the materials you need. You've got like past experience. So you're bringing to the visual journal these ideas of like, oh, I know how to work with this. I've done this thing before. I love to draw. I love to do this kind of stuff. I've tried this and it worked. You also bring to it your kind of motivation, maybe even a small amount of confidence. At least you believe in the fact that you've got some ideas. And so all those things work together. And then this visual journal it explodes. And then you do it with other people. And then that energy expands exponentially. But let's take it back. And what if you don't have that perfect environment? What if you have kids who don't have very much background in any kind of art making, who question their ability, and who maybe have even decided that art's not their thing, And now you want them to explore open-endedly in this book that's given to them, these blank white pages. And sometimes you get these statements like, I hate this. But then it's like, okay, well, let's think about, what does I hate this mean? Maybe what it means is, I don't know what to do. Or another one is, I'm really bad at this. Or I have no ideas. And it's like, well, maybe it's just you don't know which idea to put here. And so it's like, you have to sort of rethink the way that you create that ideal environment that I just described before. And so here's where I'm going to kind of, I don't know, maybe, I hope I don't offend anybody here, but what I'm going to say is you need to give yourself permission to take the lead sometimes, to not be so open-ended with them, to actually provide them with opportunities where you're teaching them hands-on, like, this is what this skill looks like, and I'd like to see you do it like this. Practice. Because also what that does, at least what it's done for me, is it creates this environment that sort of, it manufactures the motivation for them for a while, because it comes in the form of a classroom activity. And sure, maybe sometimes the motivation for some kids is like, I'm going to be graded on this. But eventually, and I know I've talked about this before, you do this kind of bait and switch thing where all of a sudden, before you know it, you're not giving them the assignment anymore, because they're giving themselves the assignment. And you didn't have to say anything, because they became, at some point, they got just enough background, they got just enough practice, they had just enough positive strokes from either a teacher or another student or a successful project or whatever it was that they did, that they begin to take the initiative on their own. And all of a sudden, that ideal environment I described before is all of a sudden there. And you don't have to sort of nurture it quite as actively as you did at the beginning. And so that's kind of my experience as a teacher with the visual journal, and the way that I address things like apathy or lack of ideation. I think sometimes it isn't because they don't want to. They say they don't want to because they don't know how.
Well, it's that quote, the scariest thing is the blank page. I think it's in Julia Cameron's work, The Artist's Way, like that is the scariest thing is the whiteness. It's, the empty stage, the blank canvas, and for kids that don't have the experience and in our community, we have a lot of kids that don't have that experience either. And you have to give them something, which was making me think about prompts, really. I know Bell has the 31 nights. I mean, maybe you want to talk about that, but prompts are a great way to get kids started or get anyone started. So if you guys want to talk about that, that might be helpful.
Sure. I mean, the prompt, there's such a power in the prompt, and like Michael Dodson was alluding to, what he's really talking about, it's all about the relationships that you have with your kids. And that all starts with why. Why are they, engaging, not engaging? Why are they feeling a certain way about art in general or the visual journal? And for me, prompts was an easy in, because what I discovered, there was a lot of kids that were asking me, they were saying, hey, Bell, listen, you have your style. How come all your works, I know it's one of yours. How come I don't have mine? And what I realized was, it wasn't that they didn't have their own style. It's just that they hadn't produced enough work to actually recognize that and see they're swimming in. So came up with this project called 31 Nights, and it was inspired by seeing and partnering later with David Leeson, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer who did these amazing 30 works in 24 hours. And they were photographs, they were self-portraits. And what inspired me were the titles. It was The Portal, The Beast, Lost You, Facing the Beast. They were titles that you could really sink your teeth into, and it became a very choice-based approach so that kids could tackle that prompt many, many ways, just like there's many ways to address a state or a national standard through challenges. And so I told my teachers, even during this pandemic, think of Guys Grocery Games, think of Chopped, but with art, where you're working with your limitations, but you're turning that into your ultimate inspiration. So that's where the power of the prompt can come in.
Yeah.
I think about, I don't know if you guys happen to watch Disney Plus, because we have kids, but there's a show on there now. It's a series, and it's called Shop Class, and it is going back to that idea of power tools, and they have two kids that are like middle school, like 5th to 8th grade,
And they give them these crazy
and they
challenges.
they have a shop teacher who's in middle school or high school, shop teacher who's with their team, and they're walking them through the whole idea of a design challenge, you know, and they've got to learn how to use the tools, and they got to learn how to build this thing, and they got to test it out, and they got to go through this whole process.
Which goes back to Michael Dodson's thoughts about, you know, you really have to build creative confidence. And I will say, just even through my own personal practice, I have to agree with Dodson on this too. And I'd be curious what everyone else's thoughts are, but I've just seen my own growth as in all areas, because I feel like my journals are a place for me to, I posted something the other day, and it didn't come out right. You know, when you type on Twitter and it doesn't come out right. But what I was trying to say is, like, somebody asked me, do I use prompts? And I said, not very often. It's really, my journals are a place for me to work through my day, you know, and they're a reflection place. And I really just vomit out my feelings, you know, like it's a place for me to think through things. And so I just know that it's been really life altering. And I think I'd been sort of journaling for a long time, but as Eric described it, when I transformed it into an everything book, that's when things really changed for me. So I'm curious what your own experiences with journaling and personal transformation have been.
I know for me, that's something that I look back 20 years ago whenever I was introduced to the journal by Dave, and just sort of how my life has changed in the 20 years, the fact that he and I have written 2 books about it. But what really gets me is seeing the power that the journal has. And that's the nice thing now with the way I'm teaching. I don't teach and give grades. I'm not in a school system. So I might travel and teach. Like I just spent a week at the beginning of March down at the John C. Campbell Folk School, working with 9 adult students for 5 full days. And so you really get a chance to like dive into it. And it's not, I shared a whole lot of materials and techniques, but we did a lot of reflective writing. And I kind of told them, I said, I don't want you to have an idea. So like on the first night, I just said, I don't want you to have an idea of what you think this is going to be. I want those ideas to kind of come to you. And I think that's kind of what happens with the journal, that, I kind of want to go back to like what both Michaels were saying, that I kind of feel like a lot of times with students and with the visual journal, it's like we want to throw them in the deep end and expect them to learn to swim. And what we find is that some of them learn how to swim, but others drown. And so, we do need to be like that lifeguard. We need to be the guide. We need to say, look, here, this is how you swim. This is how you do these things. And then you kind of build that independence. And I see that with adults too, that it's like, here, let me show you some technical things, but yet they're simple and basic. But once you get rolling with it, once you get going, it's like you really get into something, and you kind of get into a different mindset. And I think that's with the journal, a lot of times it's about focusing kind of your mind. And so I think a lot of the activities, like just simply painting or just taking a marker and filling in spaces, a lot of times you just get in this sort of very meditative space. And I feel like that journal kind of that's part of its power. And then it really gets you thinking. And then because it is an everything book, you throw everything in there, and you're making connections between things. It's not just my art book. It's, my life, and it's this wacky thing I got in the mail, or this sticker that I picked up, and all these connections start being made, and ideas grow, and ideas come out of that you could never have predicted. And so I think that's where a lot of the power of the journal is.
We have a studio dog.
Yeah, I had my microphone turned off, and then I was going to add something to add into what Eric was saying, and of course that's when my dog decided.
We understand.
Oh, good.
He got a new handkerchief today, so he's all excited.
Aww.
Sure. It's got lightning bolts on it. He thinks he's.
Oh, well, there you go.
But I was going to, that concept of the visual journal being transformative, I would just sort of echo a lot of what the other panelists have been saying about the visual journal as far as its power as a teacher, its power in working with our students, and the power that it has for us as individual artists to explore like what's important to us, but then also help our students see what's important to them that they'd like to explore. And I see that concept of the techniques and the prompts as sort of similar things. I think that a technique can be a prompt. It can be a sort of a teaser. It's like, let me show you this thing. Let me show you a way to do something, and then let me see what you do with it. So I may not be necessarily throwing them in the deep end, but maybe I'm leading them up the ladder to the high dive, right? And letting them know that, I'll be in that chair over there. I've got the life ring. Everything will be cool. Go ahead and take a plunge. And letting them know that you're there. It's like I'm not leaving you hanging. I'll be there as a mentor and kind of show you the ropes when you need it, but then also know when I need to let out some slack from them so that you can sort of, get out there and do your thing. But for me, it's like I've been working in visual journals over 20 years, and I would say that for me, the thing that's been transformative the most is just the way in which I came to the visual journal. I was at a National Art Education Association convention in DC. I went to a talk that was about sketchbooks and assessment. That was Kit Grauer from UBC at the time, and Renee Sindel, who was at MICA at the time. They talked about authentic assessment and sketchbooks, visual journals. And I was really interested in what this was all about. But what I noticed was, as a teacher, I'd been teaching about 9 years at the time. I'm sitting there in the audience in this talk, and I'm sitting there in my blazer, and I've got my yellow legal pad inside of my leather-bound little folder with my clicky pen, and I'm taking notes. And as they're talking and as they're showing imagery, I'm not sitting here using something that's native to me. This was something that somebody taught me to use. And why do I not have my sketchbook with me? That was the biggest question that struck me that day. They also introduced me to Dan Eldon. And if anybody's that's going to listen to this podcast has never looked at Dan Eldon, you want to talk about transformative, he would be the pivotal person that really transformed the way that I think about the way I make art, the way that I think about how I teach art, and the way that I think about how I look at art for research and writing and things like that. So he's that pivotal person. I think everybody's got that person. And sometimes you're that person for a student if you maybe like get yourself out of the way long enough to allow yourself to be that person. So I think about that experience at that national convention. I can remember driving home, not living that far from DC, and going to find my sketchbook. I had to find it because I'd just been to this talk. I had all this stuff I'd accumulated at the convention. I went back to my hotel room and I just started pouring all this stuff into that sketchbook. And probably a dozen pages were made in one sitting. And the thing that I remember was the sun coming up and realizing I had to be at a workshop in a couple of minutes and quickly running back to the convention center. But it's that enthralling. And I think when you think about the passion that someone has for their work or for the journal, I 9 years into my teaching career, that passion for making had been lost somewhere, and the visual journal brought it back. And what I do with my teacher preparation program for art education at my universities is I take that lesson to heart and try to get my students to never fall into that chasm that I did. I never want your art making to fall victim to your teaching. I want those two to thrive together. And I think the visual journal for me is that space where that happens.
How do we help teachers continue that though? Because Michael Bell and I have similar roles, and I really try. One of your questions on here is how do you model it for your students? And for me, it's modeling it for teachers because I lead teachers. What?
I'll tell you, you're doing it right now. It's by sharing our stories. Yeah. Like, listen, just listening to Dave just for 2 seconds, I already got a new prompt. I got a new prompt for everybody out there. It's, what is native to me? It's a perfect prompt. Yeah. What is native to me? What are you going to work with today? What's native to you? and that could transcend into a style, and that's something that could be explored in that visual journal. So I think that's how we begin it, is by sharing our stories. I don't know how many supervisors I've met over many, many, many years. There's only been very few that have actually allowed me a window into who they are. And I did that from day one. Everybody who is under me in my supervisory umbrella, they know exactly who I am. They know all my innermost thoughts, everything.
You and I are similar in that.
So important. Yeah. I mean,
I believe in transparency. There's nothing to hide. And, you know, I share my art making with them, but I also share my life with them, that, you know, we're all juggling a lot of things. And you know, but I have teachers, like I go and I believe greatly in the visual journal. It's a weird how we've crossed paths, because I had a friend, I probably started journaling when I was teaching high school and didn't realize I was journaling. And I used to share it with my students, and then we would work together, and I just didn't know that it was called visual journaling. And then I stopped because I became an assistant principal, and I stopped all art making. And then when I got back into a leadership role in the arts, I was like, I cannot do this and not make art. It's not appropriate. And so that's when I really got hard back into journaling. And I did your 31 nights, and that was a huge, big thing for me. So
you're spending more time with yourself. Absolutely.
Yeah. But, you know, we've embedded it in the curriculum, and I still have teachers that just aren't there yet, and I want to help them.
They got to buy in. They got to see the buy-in.
You're always going to have teachers that, you know, you obviously you can only lead a horse to water. I mean, that's all you can do. But
I think too.
And I think it's something about, you know, it's like Dave and I said too. I mean, early on, Dave and I had this conversation where you know, you can't start the process with teachers of wanting them to be open and take creative risks by censoring them. So, I mean, it's like you've got to uncensor yourself and be open, share your stories, and make sure that they understand that if they're willing to go there, that you're actually going to provide that safety net for them, and you're going to catch them when they fall if they do, because they're trying to do what's in the best interest of kids.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that with how do you get them invested? How do you get them to buy in? It's getting being teachers in the public schools. There's so much that's you know, here's another thing I got to do, and that really puts the teacher right in the same place as their student. There's a lot of students that are sitting in those classrooms, or I guess behind their computer screens right now, saying like, "Oh, great, another thing I have to do for my teacher." And as a teacher, going to professional development sessions that I felt had nothing to do with my content area, that's exactly how I felt. I felt like, oh, great, another thing that I got to figure out to do. And I would go to my assistant principals or my principal and say, hey, this workshop you're doing today, it's on some, you know, significant math concept for like third grade. I don't teach math. I don't just teach third grade. I could use that entire day in my classroom getting prepared to teach my content area. And I said, well, no, this is the professional development that's been prepared for everyone. Everyone must attend. It's up to you as the content specialist to figure out, how does this apply to your content area? How do you make it applicable? And so and later on in my career, I had enough, I guess, moxie to basically spout back to a principal. I said, okay, so next year, can we have an art workshop at the beginning of the year, and everybody else can figure out how they're going to put that into their curriculum? And he said, well, if you have something in mind, let's do that. And I said, sure, I'll do it. And
well, so, I mean,
and how did that go?
Yeah, how did that go?
It started out, I think it went swimmingly. It turned out that I ended up doing visual journal clubs at my school. And then ended up the following school year, I started the entire school year with fifth graders just working in visual journals. So we use that because I only meet them once a week in elementary school, which is the format for a lot of elementary schools. We could focus on a different concept, a different prompt, a different technique each time they came. And then they're invited to bring things back every week. We kept those journals in the classroom that first grading period. And then after that point, they were then allowed to take them with them. We were able to move on to other areas of the curriculum, but that journal became embedded. They created ownership. And I
Love
think
it.
Well-
that thing is the ownership of
Yeah.
the teacher.
Oh,
Ownership.
absolutely. And I think, that leads into our second part of the conversation. I don't really know exactly how we want to do that. I don't know if the recording is gonna
We'll just
die
edit.
off or what. But
Yeah.
I mean, the part two is a collaboration, and I think with that,
Mm.
Dave, like you were saying, it's having to find your own kind of professional development. I think that leads into that collaboration.
Mhm.
When you start then reaching out to other art teachers or to other teachers in general, I mean, everybody has the same kind of story at the root of everything. I mean, I know I can tell you about, I know we did last time, about my experience with the visual journal when I got it started, and just like Dodson, all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this just opened doors for everything. So that definitely, that collaboration is key. And I think that leads that first question of part two, which is how has collaboration art changed the path of your life and your own, even I've seen a change in my own style. So, in the way I make art.
Well, you got to do it yourself, and that's the biggest thing, and that's the biggest buy-in. And if the teachers out there are not attempting it for themselves, they'll never be able to understand the pitfalls that the kids are going to go through while they're trying to attempt it. Now, collaboration art, I mean, that's been a love of mine since birth, really. I mean, for me, it was a early marriage of art and writing and cartoons, graphic novels, which exploded into me writing scripts, writing screenplays for movies. Later, with some of the paintings that I did for Sopranos guys, they're like, "Oh, that's very cinematic. You should write more scripts, or you should be directing films." And then I started dabbling in that. So it kind of takes you on this big continuum. But it's, Dave and I have done the collaboration art workshops together, and it's when people come together. And I was talking with Michael Dodson the other day about this, how it's really interesting. The first experiences that I ever have given kids with painting is painting by committee. They were working around a metaphorical objects that they set up, that they create the narratives for. We don't use the word still life because everybody hates a still life. It's a scene. It's a story that they're telling. So they create the story out of these random objects, but then we're painting by committee. And once everybody gets to make their marks and be okay, as Eric said, pay a tribute of sort to somebody else's marks and make sure that you're not destroying it on purpose. You're paying some homage to it as you're working through it. You learn from each other. So it's a beautiful process. Collaboration art is such a beautiful thing.
Now, do you guys all collaborate together when you're making art? Like, how does this work?
I think
we
I
do
think
when we're out,
sometimes.
right, Sam? Pass that sketchbook around.
Well,
Yeah.
and I know Dave and I started that a long time ago. We've done so much stuff together that you go out, get some dinner. You're at a conference or you're teaching a workshop, and it's like Dave and I always had these little pocket sketchbooks, and so you're sitting there waiting for your food. So it's just natural to kind of like pull those things out and kind of doodle in them and then start to pass them around. And that's just something that's grown, especially at like the conferences and stuff. It's just sort of like, we get together and everyone pulls out their journals. If we go out for dinner or lunch, it's like everyone pulls out a little pocket sketchbook. Everyone always has pens and markers, and it just kind of gets passed around. So I think it was just something that grew out of just working together. I think whenever you're spending time with other artists, a lot of times it's just like, oh, here's this thing, we've got some time and we can kind of get into it. I also wanted to kind of go back. I think there's a theme that keeps coming up again and again in these talks that we're having, is that, first of all, I think, going back to the idea of teacher buy-in is sort of like, well, teachers have to get it for themselves. They have to make that personal connection. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times the teachers that are resistant, they either can't make a connection to it, or they they are just resistant to connecting, because like Dave was saying, it's just another thing that I have to do. It's another thing that I'm being required to do, and I just don't have the time. But if they were to sit down and personally connect to it, I think they would. And I think that's the kind of hard part, is how do you get those people that are really resistant? Because there are teachers that they're never going to buy into it, just like students. You have students who you're like, I've tried everything to connect with that student, to make them like personally buy into this. And I think that's the idea of collaboration kind of helps with that buy-in, especially with students, thinking about how seeing the student not as an inferior to you, that you're the expert trying to they're the empty vessel and you're dumping all your knowledge into them, but kind of seeing what they've done. Yep. And kind of, oh, that's a great idea. Let me do that in my journal. I know Michael Dodson's mentioned this a lot of times with working with his middle school kids.
I can definitely side with that as well. I mean, I started seeing it towards the very end of teaching elementary school. The administration would come into my classroom looking for me, and they would be looking up. They'd be looking up this way, looking for me to be like kind of towering over them. And I'm sitting down. I'm sitting at a table with a kid or a group of kids, and we're working together on whatever it is they're working on. And I really pulled that into doing that with the middle schools. And it's just crazy the way that, you're then seen as an equal, as you were just saying, rather than, oh, I'm better. And, how do you, and it becomes a different way to exchange ideas. And it's just really interesting.
Well, I think kids are more comfortable and safe in that kind of environment. They're going to share with someone that's not towering over them. It's much easier to have a conversation with somebody that wants to work alongside you than someone that wants to point their finger and say, do this, I believe in that completely. I love seeing, teachers working at tables when I'm going in to do observations. I love seeing that. But
take it a step further, Matt. When I first started, I had a coordinator, Mark Coates, who you may know him from the NAA conventions. He was one of my early mentors. Such a great guy. He took me around and showed me some of the best programs that were going on in the state, and to visibly see them in action, he said, "Listen, I want to show you this because you're doing everything right, but I want to show you what this could become." And the very first thing I did when I got back to my studio, which was, I had a expansive space, but it was a converted gym that administration thought they knew what they were doing by me. So they got me desks, they got me tables. That's what a classroom needs to look like, despite it was an old gym. And the very first thing I did when I got back was I threw out the desks and the chairs. I threw out everything. I threw out it all. And I had kids help me build drawing horses. And often administrators could come in when I was teaching and they'd find me on the floor because we're working so large that nothing would fit on these drawing horses. There were no other tables to draw that large on. So I'd be on the floor with them. But that's what it's about. I mean, that's like Eric said, it's about connecting them to the process by allowing them a place to enter, and not making it like, listen, I've built visual journaling into our curriculum in Queen Anne's County, but I know that not every single teacher is going to buy into it just because I wrote it in a curriculum, because I'm not going to be out there on every single given day.
Right.
But giving them that permission to say, it's okay when you decide to enter, that's okay.
Yeah.
Take baby steps, but I'm going to keep inviting you in.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to mandate anything. I'm going to keep inviting you in. And I'm going to keep showing you how amazing this can be by bringing in speakers, like I can do this whole thing myself, but I bring in Dave and Eric. I bring in, other people because they need to see that there's other people out there that have found value in this besides me.
I fully agree with that. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that I just always, whenever any of this stuff comes up, I'm always thinking about so what about the lens of through the lens of the kid, and not every kid's gonna buy into this either, unless great collaboration doesn't happen sort of in isolation. Right. So it's almost like I sometimes I feel like I'm sort of like this play-by-play kind of announcer in some of these collaborative things. It's like, whoa, and Jose just slammed a dunk, like with whatever. Like, so I'm like, you're like doing the play-by-play. This is awesome. Or you're calling out kids, or you're showing their work, or like, I know I've said this before, but like when you're all working on this together, you are the co-conspirators. You're all working on the same kind of crazy thing. And you're encouraging that all along the way, because oftentimes you're dealing with, a public that isn't necessarily entirely sure about, like, is what I'm doing the right thing, or is what I'm doing enough, or is it good? And like, sometimes it's just, stay in there, keep trying, keep pushing, but acknowledging them and celebrating them and supporting them through the entire thing. Because especially, for me at the middle level, the feels are just as important as the good work.
Yeah. No, I agree. It was pretty interesting to see, you start to see the change of creativity and, with at the elementary level, I think we mentioned this before, about third grade. I think that has to go to a lot of the testing and things like that. But then I really started to see it when I moved up to the middle school, the lack of self-confidence in certain things and the extra of confidence in the other things. And, and it's just really interesting because they'll be like, is this good? Is this okay? And one of the things I used to do even in elementary school would kind of turn the question around and say, well, what do you think? What do you think it's okay? Do you think it's pretty good? And, and then that builds that relationship to kind of get a conversation going, because then you can say, well, why? What makes you think that it's not so good? So.
Yeah. But Dodson, I like that. You really spoke to the idea that you have to know your students. If you can do a play-by-play like that, you've already built that relationship with your students so that you can build in the collaborative piece. That you can't just, it's just kind of like what we were talking about in the first half about, you can't just throw them into that deep end. You have to build that community to a place where collaboration is a natural part of the classroom, but that all starts with building that teacher-student relationship and then that student-to-student relationship, right?
Yeah,
And that's so important, that teacher-student relationship. But you can preach teacher-student relationship, but not everybody's gonna get it and understand what that means. I tell my team all the time, my teachers, the first thing a child is going to learn from you is whether you truly care or not. That's the very first they're going to learn about you, and they're going to learn from you. And some of the greatest educators, being out there on the National Teacher of the Year stage for many years, I got to meet some of the great ones. Some of the Jaime Escalantes of the world, some of the John Keatings. They all had one thing in common. Every one of these teachers, they know how to read a child's story. They know how to script confidence on their blank pages. And while they may not be able to give every child a fairy tale ending, they will get them through those rough periods because they care enough to figure out what's going on in their lives and figure out how to make a connection, figure out that why. So,
I was going to add in with just the concept of the collaboration, that in one way or another, I've collaborated with all these guys, and whether it's been with presentations or writing or art making, project creation, just a small book exchange. There's been a lot of that, and I think that as a teacher, it's something that you have to foster and cultivate in your classroom. It's something that you have to be willing to be part of, not just a director of. And there's no better way for a kid to start to understand what collaborating with another person might look like than if the teacher's standing there right with them, doing it alongside them. I think about Ken Robinson a lot when I think about collaboration. One of his quotes is the idea that collaboration is the stuff of growth. And part of that idea, I think, is that in schools and in the discussion and I guess the colloquialism of the academics, we talk a lot about collaboration and that it's important for kids to work together, teamwork, learning how to do things together. But how many times do we actually offer them opportunities and then actually show them how to do that? And I see this on the other end of the spectrum at the university level, kids come into my classes as 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and they still don't like group projects. They still don't know how to negotiate. They still don't know how to pull their own weight. It's because when they get a team project, it's up to the team to decide how that project's going to happen. And then we read stuff by Malcolm Gladwell, or we read something from Daniel Pink, and we find out that the corporations of the world, what their leaders talk about is, I don't need more yes men or yes women. I need somebody that knows how to come in, and I can give them a problem, but they don't know how to just solve that problem. But they can solve that problem, show me 5 different ways to solve that problem, and show me 15 other problems I've got at the same time. They need problem solvers. They need problem finders more than anything. And I think through collaboration, you learn from not only what you're doing and your mistakes, but you learn from the mistakes of those others. And there's a lot more. There's a stronger ability to take the risks on things when you're not the only one doing it. And you've got that team to sort of work along. And so I think a lot of these corporate leaders, they're sort of waiting for these people to come to them that know how to collaborate, but they're just expected to know how to collaborate, but they've never been given the opportunity to do so. And I don't know, in the art field, it seems more natural, but in some areas that are so highly reliant on standardized testing, I can see how that can be difficult.
Yeah. Well, during the pandemic, everybody's out there trying to figure out what we should do and wait for a directive what we should do. And here the 7 of us are doing it.
Doing it.
Yeah. Dodson, you were going to add something earlier.
Oh, I feel like to really get kids loosened up to take creative chances, to take creative risks, you also sort of have this, there's sort of a kind of a spiritual quality that comes with it, where it needs to just be spontaneous and fun and playful. So it may lower the stakes in terms of the aesthetic outcomes that you're trying to encourage from them. Maybe you're not even worrying about them at this point because you just want them to explore and practice and just play with media. But just sort of you're taking them on this journey of just kind of random hijinks here and there, and maybe they discover something along the way. But I think I described this once in the past too. My kids get to know me pretty well, and they realize as I start to walk around the room, they'll ask me are you going to draw on my book today? Because so it's sort of they need to be creatively flexible at all times. And I'm not saying that I go in and I'll hold them down and draw all over their book. They do know that, hey, at times that may happen because, let's stay creatively flexible all the time. Don't get yourself all stuck on one idea because it could shift, it could change, and you gotta stay ready for that next creative punch that comes your way. You never know what's going to be, and enjoy it, take on those things, and you grow through that. So I don't know, just kind of keeping it not necessarily, I guess I shouldn't say keeping the stakes low. I think it should just be always making it so positive and appealing that they're drawn to it at all times, and they aren't afraid to take any kind of chances or to at least try.
I love the hijinks.
Yeah.
I wrote that down. I've been doing
I don't think it's not keeping the stakes low. I think it's just they don't have to all be so high all the time.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Everything the kid does doesn't have to be such high stakes every single time they walk in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And I think too many people feel that way.
And Michael Dodson, we talked about this last time we were together too, about how important it is to you not only to have a relationship with the kid, but have a relationship with their visual journal. It's because they'll wait for you. Not only they're asking Michael Dodson, will you draw in my sketchbook today? Are you going to? But they're also waiting. Like I had many kids that would be waiting to see if I would pick up that sketchbook and see what they did in it the night before, and not only see what they did in it, but see if I could catch something that they hid in there specifically for me to catch, to see how much I really cared and how strictly I was paying attention to them. And that's an important piece for them because they're not getting that at home, so that they're going to get it from the visual journal and they're going to get it from that teacher.
Yeah, I have a young lady that it's so weird being in this role because I don't get to teach kids of my own anymore. But her teacher, when she was in 8th grade, was out on leave for a while. So I spent a lot of time, extra time in that classroom. And I have followed her to where now she's a senior. And so I still go into her classroom just to say hi and check on her. And the first thing she does always is show me her journal, like how and it's just the coolest thing, because I've got another young lady that I met when she was in 8th grade. She's a senior too this year. Man, they're both seniors. I feel bad for the seniors this year. I'm having a hard time with that. But they just do these amazing things in their journals, and I feel honored that they want to share them with me. I feel very honored that that's because they're personal to them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I had a question. I think, were you going to ask it? No, you could. Okay. I was just curious, in your classrooms, what has been an example that you were maybe really proud of that was an example of collaboration between students or students and teachers that you would highlight as something that would be a good practice for people?
I mean, I got a couple I can drop real quick. One, I want to center this on throughout this discussion, we've been talking about how to help teachers do buy-in and how to engage them in this space. And I just really want to talk about, teacher ed programs, not just being about we're making educator artists, we're making artist educators. So where in their education, in teacher education programs, are we talking about them learning and thinking about being artists, and also in turn taking that up in the practices that they pull out in their classroom? I think that comes a lot into connection with how we think about buy-in, because if they're not treated as artists first while they're going through their program, I think this whole thing about, I'm making it for someone else, I'm, completing the tasks, I am filling the check boxes. I think a lot of that is teacher education programs push that so much, and they put so much on top of them. At what point are they treated as artists, and at what point are they treated as educators? And does that educator mindset take over way more about, I've got to take care of X, Y, Z, I've got to do all these things for my students. And at what point are they doing for them? Are they engaging with themselves and engaging with the world because of their own artwork? And if that's not happening, then I think there's a miscommunication and a mistaking up of what it means to be in the arts. And that you should be an artist first. And that might be just my opinion. I know several other people that are in this space also feel the same way, but I don't want to discount that there are people out there who are well,
I think it's about balance, personally.
I'm not trying to knock that away. Yeah. I agree that balance is important, but
well, Sam, you know me. I vocally say it even to my teachers. Stay artists, organizing faculty exhibitions for them.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah.
So important to stay artists.
As an educator, that I was in elementary, middle school, mix school, and that's where I got Dave and Eric to come to my school when way back in 2006. And then stuff I did at Bell School. So we did stuff on the glass windows that was for the entire school. We did painted murals that were in tempera across the glass windows of the cafeteria. The work and the achievements of the art students were all over the place. And then in my own middle schools, it was always about putting the work back out into the building. You don't want to be in that sterile atmosphere. How can you constantly do work that pushes the work out into the space? I know Dave has been to this school, but I did things like every concrete square that students could walk on that was a walking place amongst buildings or around the school. We did spray painted murals where every kid got a piece of cardboard that they could cut, and then we'd spray paint stencil their design, and they could do up to 3 colors on that square. Eventually sand, snow, water, rain, dirt, it's gonna wash it all away. So we could do it year after year after year. Some of them, the squares just didn't go away. But if you have 800 kids, if you have them each do 2, all of a sudden you're going to do 1,600 of these squares all over the school. And all the foot traffic that comes into your building, this isn't just one mural, but it becomes all the foot traffic that goes around, near, and anywhere encompassing your campus, all of a sudden becomes something where the community realizes how invested you are in the arts. That's a different way of working. You know, there's always the ceiling tile thing. There's a mural thing. One year we did the egg cartons. We painted egg carton murals, and we made those for the band room. So they had some kind of sound buffering. You know, we put up foam, and then we put the egg cartons. And so we painted the egg cartons, even though it's a rounded surface. I taught my middle schoolers how to set it up so that they could think about it in a grid, making a larger painting, you know, and then also painting over that, you know, milk carton surface, you know, and it's heavy cardboard, so you got to lay a lot of acrylic on there to make it stay. You might want to treat it, I would say, with some kind of oil or plasticine in order to like make sure you can paint on top of it. But it was definitely trial by error for me as an early teacher. You know, Dave and I right now, in both teacher education programs, we mail Tetrad books back to each other in bulk. You know, my students, I should say, they're adults. My students, we send a bunch of books over to Dave's school. They work in it and send it back. And we try to do at least 4 exchanges over the course of a semester, so that those students get the experience of like what it means to have a conversation, either visually or written, with another educator in another institution. My students are generally elementary generalists. They aren't art education students currently, but Dave's students are. And so it's an interesting space for them to have a conversation in the Tetrad books where their studio practice can mix and they can learn from one another throughout a semester's time frame.
Sam, I'm thinking how that is so incredibly awesome, because those elementary general teachers can bring that back to their classrooms, and you've given them a little tiny bit level of confidence in, hey, this isn't that scary. It doesn't matter if I can draw well or if I can't draw well. This is something that I can probably start to incorporate in their classroom. And the second they get back to their classrooms, they can do that. When you mentioned that, it made me think about when I was teaching elementary. Every year for almost 5 years, I was doing a sketchbook swap with my 5th graders and our 9th and 10th art students. And I had my kids make these accordion books, and we did it as like, I had a few of the drawing prompts that we did and a few other things. And they had these conversations back and forth with these 9th and 10th graders. And it was really interesting because there were some kids that were like, oh my gosh, this is my brother's friend, or this is my sister's, best friend, or whatever. Or one kid actually got their sibling, which was really crazy. But it was just kind of a cool way to just continue that collaboration. So,
well, you guys bring up a cool thing. I know we're probably running way over on, time with this one, but, we could almost do a whole other one. We went from the collaboration art itself, but we could almost do a whole thing on actually building the collaborative culture in the communities.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
In the schools. I mean, with the visual journals, I was, like Laura, you go around and you still get back into schools and you get to know those kids. And I do the same thing. And I literally have in my office a suitcase that's jam-packed. Dave will attest to it. He's seen it. This huge suitcase that weighs so much. It's filled with the most amazing visual journals that kids have given to me over the years. And we have a contract, and that contract is very simple. It's whenever you want it back, whether you're 40 years old down the road, you want it for your kids, I'll hold on to it. I won't let anything happen to it. You can have it back. But in the meantime, I want to be able to share all these variations of what this visual journal could look and feel like. And I think teachers need to do that. I used to have it in my classroom. I had a whole entire shelf just filled with them, so they could walk over and browse them whenever they wanted to, like their own personal library, and be inspired and say, I want to do something bigger than that, something better than that, something beyond that, something deeper than that. So
Bell's being
you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Yeah, you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Bell is being modest here. It was a 12-foot panel shelf, and we're talking one end to the other filled with sketchbooks, and for him only to take a single suitcase full of them is just a small microcosm of what he could be.
Yeah, I left a lot for the future generations, but but that's so important. I mean, that's what a teacher could start out with, a few, and build it. So
Absolutely.
that's what will start building that inner culture. I mean, we could talk for days about building the school culture in a totally different capacity, much like you build athletes. I mean, we had fans that had, Sam knows, he still probably has his, Dave has imagination, dedication, hard work. We had it on our wrist.
Oh, nice.
And every kid had them. And
Bring those back.
yeah, we'd see those seniors in the tunnel, even kids that I never had, and I'd see that wristband. I'd say, "Oh, you're my people." We
it's interesting to me because there's a lot of people that are very reluctant to share. How do you help them get to that place where, I mean, because I know you guys all share. I've seen you with your table of journals, giant journals.
Your husband included.
And Matt, all you guys. And I'm like, I'm gonna go now. But you guys are open door, open book. But not everybody's like that. How do you help people get to that place?
I think you have to, first of all, you have to give them lots and lots of opportunities to put work in, because oftentimes, especially with people, with students or people who are skeptical about it, like, you can't see it in the one-offs. You have to sort of see this large body of ideas and work that you've accumulated, or that sort of accumulated you and maybe other collaborators. And when that reflects back at you, I think of my students, that book becomes their, it's almost like their identity as an artist is bound up inside that book. It's really, it becomes important to them. And you can't tell them it's going to be important to them, much like you can't tell most middle school kids what's going to be good for them, because they have to figure it out on their own. But like almost all the time, they will eventually realize this thing is awesome. But you need to give them lots of opportunities to put stuff in it. And then, at least for me, I really try to sustain the magic of it. Like, I do stuff where, they'll swap journals with each other, where they take sticky notes and you have to give 3 compliments and a question. Or I do these things where I take little sticky notes and I draw all over them all the time. Sam and Dave saw me doing it when we were in Colorado. I'll stick those in kids' books. I mean, it's like, I sort of maintain this, and maybe it's not necessarily something all teachers would want to do, but there's something magical about that book too. Like, they don't, it's like they'll open that book up and I've written something in there, or someone else has written something in there, or and that part, which feels like, ooh, am I going to open my book today and something's changed? That is exciting for them.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that, that just brings back the discussion of the collaborative, that, that co-construction of this space can be helpful. Kids are more willing to share when they know it's not just me who's on the line with something that can be helpful. I also like the notion that Michael Dodson brought up, just that giving them ample opportunity to work in the book. And so many times talking to teachers about visual journals, will come to a talk, excuse me, or a workshop, and say that, oh yeah, we did visual journals, and so they're always looking at it as something that you do it and then you're done with it. It's another project, it's another one-off. And I think the way that we speak about visual journals is that it is not that way. This is an ongoing practice that is ongoing alongside all of the other studio practice that's taking place in the classroom, and it's all part of the same process. That all of this is going on together. And as far as getting students who might be reluctant to share their work, I think you lead by example, like Michael Bell was saying. It's like, you need to be willing, and like Laura said, you need to be willing to, I'm willing to show you whatever you want to see. But what I try to reflect to my students is, this is my way. This is a way to do this. Let me show you all these other ways as well. You need to figure out what your way is. There's no wrong way as long as you're doing something. As long as you're showing me what your way might be or what your way is going to become, there's no way to do this wrong. The only way to do it wrong is not to do it at all. And so there's that aspect. And then I was thinking too, what was striking me when Michael Dodson was speaking about the sharing part. I can remember being in my MFA program, and this also kind of dives into the collaboration piece, that my door was always open to my studio, and I'd be in there. That music was probably as loud as who knows what, but people would come in and they would want to see what you're doing. And my one friend, Brandon Wallace in particular, would come in there all the time. And it got to a point where we would switch studios, and I'd go in his studio and just start working on something he was doing. He'd come right into my room and start working on something I was doing. A half hour later, we'd switch back and see what the other person did. Just for the fun of it, just for that discrepant event to take place, that interruption, that disruption, that there was no way I could do that on my own. And I think that collaboration brings that. And then I also had a professor, I won't use any names, but I also had a professor who was a big journal keeper as well, visual journal keeper. And she got to see what I was doing with visual journals. And it was right at the point where Eric and I were writing our book. And she was telling me how, she keeps all of these visual journals, but, they're private. Nobody sees these. She's got over 60, 75 of them stacked up in her studio. And her criticism of my practice was like, well, how uncensored, how unhinged can you be if you're letting other people look at it? You have, there has to be a notion of censorship going into it. And all I said is, it's like, she's a photographer. She was a photographer. I'm like, you go out and take a picture. How is that not censored and tainted right from the beginning? Because it's your eye looking through the lens. It's, it's like, how specific do we want to be? I want to feel that I'm as honest and open as I can be in my journal. I let my students know, like, hey, this is my book. Be forewarned. What I found interesting, though, from that criticism was that she was so quick to criticize the practice that I supposedly had. But I had no criticism of hers. I was just sort of like, hey, if you want to keep them secret, that's up to you.
Right.
The fact that I want to share mine, why is that wrong?
Well, here's an interesting thing too that I've noticed over the years. Like, Laura, you brought this up about sharing work online and so forth, and recently, only really due to because I was hacked on a really crazy level, I shut down all my social media. So here's an interesting thing, though. It really got me thinking, though, because I used to try to build some buy-in with that. But now with social media being so saturated that it's so easy for someone, even classmates that don't even like a kid, to drop a like. They don't even think twice about it. That to actually do what Michael Dodson proposes, where you're dropping a Post-it, you're taking the time to drop a very personal, handwritten notation or drawing or whatever into that sketchbook, and it's a private exchange between you and them and whoever that class. Very similar to the way a coach would say, "Hey, everything stays in the locker room." It's a very similar mentality that way, where you build that camaraderie. And I always had it with my kids. I think that nowadays, moving away from that model, I think that the visual journal becomes even more important because you can get on that personal level. And sure, you could create buy-in by sharing a certain thing or something like that, but going deeper would be the extra step.
Yeah.
That would be the grand slam. That would be beyond.
I agree. Yeah, I think Michael Bell is right. We could talk forever. I really do. And I honestly think we probably will speak again. But as you guys know, we like to wrap the chat up with your nuggets of wisdom. Is that what you called it?
Pearls of wisdom.
Pearls of wisdom. I don't know.
Something.
Whatever. What little bit of inspiration you want to leave with the listeners, and kind of the.
Whether it's about collaboration, whether it's about journaling or anything else. Yeah.
So whoever
wants to go first.
We started with Sam last time, so why don't we just go with Sam first?
All right,
you're on the spot.
I think last time I was talking about phenomenology and post-intentional phenomenology as like a conceptual format in arts-based research. Both of those are, I think, super important, but it's very heady, blah 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 stuff. And how does that work for the practical teacher? Since this is K-12 art chat, I want to make sure I keeping it real I'm keeping it acceptable.
Keep
for
him
the-
in check, Dave.
Otherwise, Bell will come
Well, I
after
got
you.
him.
Sounds very
I got him.
PhD.
So I'm not,
I got my dictionary out. Better watch out.
I'm gonna leave this simple. There's a great book by Lewis Hyde, and it's called The Gift. In it, he talks about communal art, and he uses some really great examples in there. And I would highly recommend taking a look at it, because it talks about how in non-Western culture, the idea of a communal artwork was something that of the highest level of worship and belief and community structure, and it was something that they centered societies on and around, about passing on shared artworks that were so highly prized amongst communities, amongst tribes, amongst societies, that it would become a gift from one group of people to another, and they would share these shared artworks across. The idea of a totem wasn't always just something that sat in the ground, but it was also about a sharing of culture. And I think if we can think about a collaborative artwork in any one big way, it's how are you making something that gives off this like beautiful spiritual power to it, and that can be shared as a gift from one person to another, from one group of people to another. And Lewis Hyde says it much more articulately than I can, but that's why I think my little pearl of nugget and wisdom is how can you bring that into your classroom? The idea that
I love that.
when you're making an artwork and showing somebody else with it, whether you're seeing Van Gogh's Sunflowers or you're seeing some piece of abstract work by Jackson Pollock face to face for the first time, or you're seeing a conceptual art performance, how can you recognize that your experiencing of that work is a gift? It's a gift from the maker to you. It's a gift from the maker to the universe, to the community, to society, and how can you carry that forward? That's my nugget.
Yeah, I would say my quick nugget, would just be that of the artist and the educator, and it's the thing that I tell my art ed students as soon as they get into my program, is that do not lose faith and do not lose track of who you are as a maker. As you're learning to become an educator, you will get to a point where they're sort of on a dual track together. And when you get your job, you're going to be sort of in that position where you're, I used to say wearing two hats, but I think you're really wearing one hat with two brims. And it's realizing that you are the expert in your field. And in a lot of cases, you may be the only art educator in your school. And you are the expert, and there is no one else, unless you're lucky to have an administrator who's also an art educator. But you may be the only person in that building who is the expert in your field, and don't forget that you are. And that when it comes to your curriculum and it comes to what's important about art and what's important about teaching kids about art, you are the determining factor. You are the authority in that particular subject area, and to not be intimidated, not to be afraid to voice your opinion when you know that there's something that needs to be done in a certain way. And I think if you can hold on to who you are as an artist and not forget, and it's very difficult, and the reason I speak to this so much with my students is I know that it happened to me, and it took a few years of teaching and other work to get back to the visual journal was the hinge pin that brought that back for me. I know that for sure. But if you can leave the undergraduate program and go out into the classroom in a K-12 setting and just never lose track of it from the beginning, then you're going to be starting off on better footing than I did.
And for me, I'll jump in, be real, challenge the process. I've often said the most important job of an artist is to draw a line from your life to your art that's straight and clear. Mm-hmm. And in education, just piggybacking off of what David said, it's truly is selfless service for somebody else's success. So you got to be willing to take that journey with them and try to bring people up from wherever they are to help them imagine what their future could be, because they won't most likely be able to imagine it without you. They need you more than ever right now.
Absolutely.
I think gonna riff off of what Sam said because it immediately spoke to me as this visual journal thing as a gift. Visual journal is a gift, and I love to give it to students. But just because I know what a wonderful and valuable gift it is doesn't mean that they do. And so it's not just giving the gift; it's also showing them and teaching them how to open it.
Oh, yeah.
And an unboxing.
Nice.
That's awesome.
I like that analogy.
Unpack that suitcase, pal.
Yeah, I think it kind of. I mean, I've said it before tonight that it's just, for me, it's approach it from the personal point of view first, figure out how it works for you, and then it's kind of like it's giving that gift to yourself first, especially with the visual journal, and figuring out how it's working for you, and then being able to then gift it to other people. And I think that's what teaching is about, is that notion, like, I've got something that I want to share. It's something that resonates with me, and I want to share it with other people. And I think if we approach it and get excited about it from our own personal standpoint, then we share that excitement, that enthusiasm with our students, our fellow teachers, our fellow human beings. And I think that's one of the powerful things with art and with the visual journal.
Wow.
Awesome. Okay.
Deep breath. I mean, it's just
So much to take in,
for us,
and
it's a pleasure to always visit with you guys. We're such believers in the process of the visual journal and the power of the journal and the power of collaboration. That's what it's all about. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot
Thanks
for
so much.
giving us this opportunity to share.
All 5 of you, the Fab Five.
I know, that's awesome. I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if that was going to all work, but it did. So
Well, we'll do it again tomorrow when Sam doesn't record it.
Oh man, you guys are great.
I love you, Sam.
Well,
That's recorded, Sam.
well, hey guys, just wishing you guys creative endeavors moving forward, and we'll be in touch. So thank you so much.
All right. Good night,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.